The illusion of connection, dissecting correlation, causation, and the methods to tell them apart. When two things walk side by side, are they in love or just parallel universes? Welcome back, dear listeners, to another episode of Information for Life, Insights and Ideas to Navigate Your World. Today, we're diving into a topic that's as misunderstood as a poet in a physics class: why correlation does not equal causation. We'll also explore how to test if correlation is, in fact, causation, and share some fascinating examples from research history. And yes, we are definitely going to unpack the whole notion of vaccines cause autism as an example. So grab your favorite beverage and let's get started. Section 1. The Mirage of Correlation. Yes, correlation. Imagine you're at a bar and you meet someone who claims to be a millionaire. They're dressed in a sharp suit, flashing a Rolex, and ordering the most expensive drinks. You might think, wow, this person must be successful. But then when the tab comes, they suddenly can't pay. That's correlation for you. A flashy concept that promises to explain how two things are related, but often leaves you hanging when you dig a little deeper. In statistical terms, correlation is a measure that tells us how strongly two variables are related to each other. Let's break that down. A variable is anything that can change or be different, like your height, the temperature outside, or the amount of money in your bank account. When we say two variables are correlated, we mean that when one variable changes, the other tends to change in a specific way too. Think of it like a dance. If two dancers are perfectly in sync, moving flawlessly together, they have a high correlation. If they're stepping on each other's toes and moving in opposite directions, they have a negative correlation. And if one dancer is doing the tango while the other is breakdancing, well, there's no correlation at all. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Just because two things are correlated doesn't mean one is causing the other to happen. This is the crux of the phrase, correlation does not imply causation. It's like saying just because you see people carrying umbrellas when it's raining doesn't mean the umbrellas are causing the rain. For a more scholarly example, let's consider a study published in the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health. This study found a correlation between the amount of chocolate consumed by a country and the number of Nobel Prizes that country has won. That's early 2012. At first glance, you might think, great, I'll eat more chocolate and become a genius. But hold on, this is a classic case where correlation does not imply causation. There could be a myriad of other factors at play. Maybe countries that consume more chocolate also invest more in education, or perhaps they have higher levels of overall well-being, which could indirectly lead to more Nobel Prizes. So before you start stockpiling chocolate bars in the hopes of becoming the next Einstein, remember, correlation is not your golden ticket to genius. But hey, it might just make you happier about not being one. By understanding the limitations of correlation, you arm yourself with some of the critical thinking skills needed to navigate a world full of misleading headlines and dubious claims. So the next time you hear someone say A is correlated with B, you'll know to ask the crucial follow-up question, but does A actually cause B? Section 2. The tools to test causation. So we've established that correlation is like that charming but deceptive character at the bar who promises the world but can't even settle the bill. But what if you want to go beyond the surface and find out what's really going on? How do we move from the nebulous world of correlation to the more concrete, factual realm of causation? Well, my friends, it's time to roll up our sleeves and dive into the toolbox of research methods. Controlled experiments. First up, we have controlled experiments. Imagine you're a detective and you've got a room full of suspects. A controlled experiment is like isolating one suspect in an interrogation room and scrutinizing their every move. In scientific terms, you manipulate one variable, known as the independent variable, to see if it causes a change in another variable, which is the dependent variable. For example, if you're studying the effects of sunlight on plant growth, the amount of sunlight would be your independent variable, and the plant's growth would be the dependent variable. By controlling all other factors, like soil quality and water, you can confidently say whether or not sunlight causes the plant to grow. Let's break it down even more. A controlled experiment is like being a detective who's trying to figure out who committed a crime. You have a bunch of suspects, but you want to focus on just one to see if they're guilty. In science, this suspect is called the independent variable. It's the thing you're changing to see if it makes a difference. Let's say you're looking at how sunlight affects how fast a plant grows. The sunlight is like your suspect. The dependent variable is what you're measuring to see if the suspect has an effect. In our example, that would be how much the plant grows. Now, to make sure your suspect is really the one affecting the outcome, you have to control everything else. That means making sure all the plants get the same amount of water, the same type of soil, and so on. This way, you can be pretty sure that any changes in the plant's growth are because of the sunlight, not something else. So if the plant grows more when you give it more sunlight, you can confidently say that yes, sunlight helps the plant grow. Clear? Clear. Statistical tool, regression analysis. Next, we have statistical methods like regression analysis. If controlled experiments are the detectives, then regression analysis is the forensic team sifting through layers of data to find clues. This method allows you to control for other variables that might be influencing the relationship between your main variables of interest. It's like having a lie detector test for your data, helping you separate the truth from the noise. Let's stick with a plant example to explain regression analysis. Imagine you're still that detective, but now you've got a whole team of experts helping you out, like the people you see on crime shows who analyze fingerprints, DNA, and other clues. That's what regression analysis is like. It's a tool that helps you dig deeper into your investigation. Let's say you still want to know how sunlight affects plant growth, but now you're also wondering if other things, like the type of soil or the amount of water, play a role. Regression analysis is like having a super smart computer program that can look at all these factors at once and tell you which ones really matter. So instead of just focusing on sunlight, you can use regression analysis to look at sunlight, water, and soil all together. This way, you can figure out if sunlight is still the main reason the plant is growing more, or if it's actually something else. Think of it like a lie detector test for your investigation, which lie detectors are complete fallacy, and I should probably get into that in another episode. I'm going to get sidetracked here. Think of it like a lie detector test for the investigation. It helps you sort out which factors are really affecting the plant's growth and which ones are just distractions. In the real world, the software does a lot of complex math, but the basic idea can be understood with some simpler math concepts you might learn in 10th grade, like plotting points on a graph and finding the line of best fit. Step 1. Collect data. First, you collect data on each plant. Let's say you measure, number 1, sunlight in hours, your independent variable, and number 2, plant growth in inches, your dependent variable. Step 2. Input data into the software. You input this data into the software. Imagine it's like plotting points on a graph where the x-axis is sunlight and the y-axis is plant growth. Step 3. Run regression analysis. When you run the analysis, the software tries to find the line of best fit through these points. This line helps you understand the relationship between sunlight and plant growth. Step 4. Get the equation of the line. The software will give you an equation for this line, something like plant growth equals open parentheses 0.5 times sunlight, close parentheses, plus 3. This equation tells you that for each additional hour of sunlight, the plant grows by 0.5 inches, and the base growth is 3 inches even with no sunlight. Step 5. Interpret the results. Now, you can use this equation to make predictions. If you want a plant to grow 5 inches, we can rearrange the equation to find out how many hours of sunlight it would need. So, in very simple terms, the software is like a really advanced graphing calculator. It plots all your data points, finds the best line that goes through them, and gives you an equation that you can use to make predictions and decisions. Now, let's get a bit dark. Remember that, while it technically would be unethical, you could feasibly and fairly easily these days run a regression analysis on a person's social media post history to find out what maximizes emotions like frustration, happiness, anger, what makes them purchase the most products, and even whether or not they are likely to have a personality disorder. Running a regression analysis on a person's social media post history to understand their behavior or emotional state is a complex task that involves multiple steps. But remember, we're dealing with computers and narrow AI now, so not only is this possible, it's pretty straightforward to do. Here's how it could work, broken down into simpler terms. Step 1, data collection. First, the AI would gather all the posts, comments, likes, and other interactions from the person's social media history. This is like collecting all the clues about the person. This is already done. It's on servers around the world, duplicated in multiple locations. And since you can back up your data before closing an account, the tools are already in place. Step 2, variable identification. Next, the AI would identify what variables or factors it wants to study. For example, it might look at the frequency of certain words or phrases, the time of day when posts are made, or the type of contents like photos, links, etc. that are shared. There's really virtually unlimited variables it could study about someone. Step 3, data pre-processing. The AI would then clean and organize the data. This could involve removing duplicate posts, filtering out irrelevant information, or converting text into a format that's easier to analyze. Step 4, feature engineering. The AI might create new variables that could be more informative. For example, it could count the number of positive or negative words in each post, or measure the length of time between posts. Step 5, run a regression analysis. Now the AI would run the regression analysis to see how the variables it's studying are related to the behavior or emotional state it's trying to understand. For example, it might look at how the frequency of negative words correlates with the time of day the posts are made. Step 6, interpret results. After running the analysis, the AI would look at the results to see which variables are most strongly related to the behavior or emotional state in question. For instance, it might find that posts containing more negative words are more likely to be made at night. Step 7, further investigation. If the AI finds a strong correlation, it might suggest further investigation like a clinical evaluation for a personality disorder or a deeper look into what triggers anger, for example. Does this already happen? Well, you'd never be able to prove it, would you? AI is already really good at describing photos or creating photos based on descriptions. The images for this episode were created off a description of what I wanted to see in order to embody this episode. So maybe we should think a bit and pause before posting all those selfies and everything we do every day and how we're feeling all the time, Another statistical tool, causal diagrams. But wait, there's more. A paper in the Journal of Causal Inference talks about causal diagrams, Pearl and Mackenzie 2018. These are graphical methods that help you visualize and understand the relationships between multiple variables. Imagine a web of strings connecting different points. Each string represents a relationship, and the causal diagram helps you untangle this web to find out which strings are actually pulling the weight. It's like a map that guides you through a maze of correlations to find the true path of causation. Let's keep using the plant example to explain causal diagrams. Step 1. Identify all possible variables. First, you list out the things that could possibly affect how much a plant grows. This could include sunlight, water, soil types, and maybe even things like temperature or whether you talk to your plants. Step 2. Draw the diagram. Next, you draw a diagram that looks like a web or a network. Each point on this web represents one of the variables you've listed. You then draw arrows or lines, the strings, between points that you think are related. For example, you might draw an arrow from sunlight to plant growth to show that you think sunlight affects how much the plant grows. Step 3. Add data and observations. Now you add in what you know or suspect about how these variables interact. Maybe you've read that certain soil types retain water better, which could affect plant growth. You'd represent this by drawing an arrow from soil type to water retention and another from water retention to plant growth. Step 4. Analyze the diagram. Once your diagram is complete, you look at it to see if you can find the most direct paths that lead to plant growth. These are the variables that you think have the biggest impact, and they're the ones you'd want to focus on in any experiments or changes you make. Make adjustments and test. After studying the diagram, you might decide to run some tests focusing on the variables you've identified as most important. You'd then update your diagram based on what you find. So, in simple terms, a causal diagram is like a treasure map. It helps you figure out the quickest route to the quote-unquote treasure, which in this case is understanding what make your plants grow the best. You use it to avoid getting lost in a maze of different factors that might not actually matter that much. It's like being a detective with a map that shows you all the possible clues and helps you figure out which ones are most likely to solve the case. So, if you're feeling like you're in an episode of CSI Data Edition, you're not far off. The scene crime is a messy spreadsheet, the suspects are elusive variables, and your tools are controlled experiments, regression analysis, and causal diagrams. But instead of solving a crime, you're solving the mysteries of causation. And let's be honest, in a world full of misleading information, that might just be the greater public service. By understanding these tools, you're not just becoming a better researcher or a more informed individual, you're becoming a critical thinker, capable of questioning the world around you and discerning fact from fiction. And in today's world, that's a superpower. Section 3. Independent and dependent variables. All right, let's pause for a moment and delve into a concept that's as fundamental to understanding research as knowing your left from your right. I'm talking about independent and dependent variables, the yin and yang of the scientific method. These two elements are the backbone of any experiment, and understanding their relationship is like having a compass in a labyrinth. It guides you toward finding what's actually causing what. So, what are these variables? In the simplest terms, the independent variable is the one you, the researcher, manipulate. Think of it as the puppet master's hand pulling the strings to make the puppet, our dependent variable, dance. The dependent variable is what you measure in response to these manipulations. It's the puppet's dance moves, if you will. Let's break it down with an everyday example. Imagine you're trying to figure out if watering a plant more often will make it grow faster. In this case, the frequency of watering is your independent variable. You have control over it. The growth of the plant, measured perhaps in inches or number of leaves, is your dependent variable. It's what you're interested in observing. Now, here's where the magic of causation comes into play. In a controlled experiment, you'd manipulate the independent variable, in our example, changing how often you water the plant, and then observe any changes in the dependent variable, which is the plant's growth. But, and this is crucial, you'd also control for other variables that could affect the plant's growth, like sunlight, soil quality, and even the type of plant. This is like making sure the puppet show audience is only watching the puppet you're controlling, not getting distracted by other puppets on other stages. If, after all this meticulous setup, you find that the dependent variable, or growth of the plant, changes when you manipulate the independent variable, frequency of watering, and you've ruled out the influence of other factors, then voila, you've established a causal relationship. You can confidently say that the frequency of watering affects the plant's growth. Understanding the roles of independent and dependent variables is like having the keys to the kingdom of causation. It allows you to unlock the doors of understanding, to step beyond the surface correlations and explore the deeper, more meaningful connections that shape our world. And in a world that often feels as chaotic as a puppet show with no puppet master, that's a pretty empowering skill to have. Section 4. Historical examples. The annals of research history, a place where theories are born, debunked, and sometimes reborn again like a phoenix from the ashes. Let's wander through these corridors and look at some classic examples that illustrate why it's so crucial to distinguish between correlation and causation. First up, we have the curious case of ice cream sales and drowning incidents. Picture this. It's a scorching summer day, and you notice two things. Ice cream trucks are doing a roaring trade, and sadly, the news reports an uptick in drowning incidents. Now, if we were to plot these two variables on a graph, you'd see both ice cream sales and drowning incidents tend to rise together during the summer months. But hold on a minute. Does this mean enjoying a scoop of mint chocolate chip is going to lead you to a watery demise? Of course not. The lurking variable here, the unseen puppeteer pulling the strings, is the hot weather. People are more likely to buy ice cream and go swimming when it's hot, increasing the risk of drowning. So the correlation is there, but causation? Not so much. Now, let's turn our attention to a study published in the Journal of Health Economics. This research found that children who sleep more tend to have higher IQs. Lundahl and others, 2015. Now, before you start setting multiple alarms to ensure your kids get to bed on time in hopes of raising little geniuses, pump the brakes. While the study does show a correlation between more sleep and higher IQ, it doesn't account for a multitude of other factors that could be influencing IQ levels. These could include the quality of education the children are receiving, the level of parental involvement, or even genetic factors. So while it might be tempting to think that more sleep equals a smarter child, the reality is far more complex. Another intriguing example comes from healthcare research. Studies have shown that people who take more vitamins tend to have higher rates of certain diseases. Fletcher and Fairfield, 2002. At first glance, you might think, oh no, vitamins are bad for me. But when you dig deeper, you'll find that people who are already sick or at risk for diseases are more likely to take vitamins in the first place. So the correlation exists, but it's not that vitamins are causing the diseases. Rather, the diseases are causing people to take more vitamins. Let's look at one more from the world of technology. There's a noted correlation between the amount of time people spend on social media and levels of anxiety or depression. Primick and others, 2017. While it might be tempting to declare social media as the root of all modern emotional evil, it's not that straightforward. People who are already anxious or depressed might spend more time on social media as a coping mechanism, or perhaps the relationship is bidirectional and feeds into a vicious cycle. So, parents, if your kid prefers the moon to the sun and loves to stay up late, don't lose hope. They might not be the next Einstein, but hey, there's still a chance they'll outsmart a fifth grader, and let's be honest, some days that's a win in itself. Section 5. The dark side of misinterpreting correlation. Misinterpreting correlation as causation isn't just an academic faux pas. It can have real-world consequences, sometimes with dire implications. Let's delve into some examples where this misunderstanding led to misguided directions or could have even caused harm. The case of hormone replacement therapy. For years, observational studies showed that women taking hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, had lower rates of heart disease. This led many to believe that HRT was protective against heart disease. However, when controlled trials were finally conducted, the results were shocking. Not only did HRT not protect against heart disease, but it also increased the risk of blood clots and breast cancer. Rosso and others, 2002. The initial correlation was misleading, and the misunderstanding led to incorrect treatment recommendations for years. The autism vaccine myth. Perhaps one of the most damaging examples in recent history is the purported link between vaccines and autism. A single 1998 study claimed to find a correlation between the MMR vaccine and the onset of autism in children. Wakefield and others, 1998. Despite the study being discredited many times and retracted, which incidentally is why peer review and replications of study are so important, the damage was done. Vaccination rates dropped, leading to unnecessary and avoidable outbreaks of diseases like measles. The correlation was not only misinterpreted as causation, but was based on fraudulent data to begin with, which we are going to get into. So while vaccines won't turn your kid into a superhero, they do arm them with something even better: immunity against preventable diseases. And let's be clear, being alive to face life's challenges and triumphs, that's the most superpower-like quality there is, if you ask me. That being said, as promised, let's unpack a bit more about the infamous single vaccine study in particular. The autism vaccine myth unpacked. The 1998 study by Andrew Wakefield and colleagues claimed to find a correlation between the MMR, or measles, mumps, and rubella, vaccine and the onset of autism in children. The study was published in the prestigious medical journal The Lancet, giving it an air of credibility. However, the study had several critical flaws that later led to its retraction. Why the study was false. Small sample size, or N size. The study was based on only 12 children, N equals 12, an extremely small sample size to make such a sweeping claim. The result of any study, which such a small n size, would generally be considered preliminary and would need to be confirmed through additional studies with larger sample sizes to make even a 95% assurance that something is being caused by something else, which is exactly what happened, debunking that study. Lack of control group. There was no control group to compare the children who received the MMR vaccine against those who did not, a fundamental requirement for establishing causation. Conflict of interest. Wakefield had financial interests that he did not disclose, including a patent for a rival vaccine. This is the epitome of biased research. Ethical concerns. The study used invasive procedures on children without proper ethical approval. Data manipulation. Subsequent investigations found that Wakefield had manipulated the data. Because of these and other issues, the paper was fully retracted in 2010, and Wakefield was actually stripped of his medical license. However, the damage was already done. Vaccination rates dropped, leading to outbreaks of preventable diseases like measles. The persistence of the myth. Despite absolutely overwhelming evidence to the contrary, estimates suggest that 95 to 98% of studies show no link between vaccines and autism. The myth persists. Why? Confirmation bias. People tend to seek out and believe information that confirms their pre-existing beliefs. If a parent of a child with autism comes across the vaccine myth, it provides an explanation. And it's comforting to have something to blame, especially if you believe subconsciously that there may have been a genetic component. Cognitive dissonance. Admitting that the belief in the vaccine autism link is wrong would create psychological discomfort for those who have been vocal proponents of this view. Cognitive dissonance can be a harsh psychological experience, leading individuals down paths of flawed reasoning, and in some cases, turning them into cautionary examples for others. Community reinforcement. Online forums and social media groups often create echo chambers where only one side of the story is told, reinforcing the myth. High emotional stakes. For parents of children with high-functioning autism, the condition is often a significant part of their daily lives. The desire for an explanation can make people more susceptible to false information. So the next time someone tries to tell you the vaccines cause autism, you might want to ask them if they also believe the earth is flat, because let's face it, both claims have about the same amount of scientific backing. But remember, it's important to approach both examples with compassion and empathy, because at the end of the day, if you don't know, you don't know. Misinformation and misdirection can affect anyone, regardless of their intellectual capabilities, and it's crucial to remember that a lack of education does not correlate with a lack of intelligence. By understanding both the flaws in the original study and the psychological factors that contribute to the persistence of this vaccine autism myth, we can better combat misinformation and promote public health. Okay, let's get off the vaccine autism myth and get into other historical examples. The lead crime hypothesis. In the late 20th centuries, researchers noticed a correlation between lead exposure in children and later criminal behavior. Some policymakers jumped to the conclusion that lead exposure caused criminal behavior and advocated for immediate, widespread lead removal. While reducing lead exposure is undoubtedly beneficial for numerous health reasons, attributing criminal behavior solely to lead exposure oversimplifies a complex issue influenced by socioeconomic factors, education, and more. Nevin, 2007. These examples serve as cautionary tales of how misinterpreting correlation can lead to misguided or even harmful actions. They underscore the importance of rigorous scientific inquiry and critical thinking in interpreting data and making informed decisions. By examining these historical examples, we can see how easy it is to jump to conclusions based on correlations. It's like seeing two people argue and immediately assuming they must be in a relationship, and further, that relationship must be on shaky ground. Sometimes, the reality is far more nuanced, and it takes a discerning eye to separate the wheat from the chaff, to distinguish what's truly causing an effect from what merely appears to be. And there we have it, folks. The next time someone tries to sell you a story based on flimsy correlation, you'll be armed with the wisdom to ask, But is it causation? Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep striving to be truly better in all aspects of your life than the day before.